November 8, 2004. Dawn broke over Fallujah, but the city was already trembling with the roar of incoming artillery. Smoke hung low over the outskirts, curling into the sky in black, angry plumes. The first missiles hit before the sun had fully risen, ripping through the silence like thunder. Shards of concrete and dust flew into the air, coating streets in gray ash. John Miller, 32, a U.S. Marine Corps officer, scrambled from his armored vehicle with his platoon. His boots crunched over shattered glass and debris. He scanned the streets for movement, for threats, for any sign of insurgents. The city had already become a maze of danger, a deadly puzzle waiting to claim the unwary. Around him, Marines checked their gear, their faces taut with focus. Each knew the stakes, every second counted, and every step carried the possibility of death. Across town, Ahmed Al-Sad, 28, gripped his young daughter's hand as his neighborhood came under bombardment. His eyes were wide with terror. Explosions tore through nearby buildings, shaking the walls and sending shards of brick and metal through the air. Families fled, screaming, ducking into basements and mosques. Ahmed's heart pounded as he guided his daughter through rubble-strewn streets, the screams of neighbors mingling with the wail of sirens. The city he had lived in all his life was vanishing before his eyes. The U.S. Marines advanced into Fallujah's outskirts. Intelligence reports streamed in over radios, warning of insurgent positions in every block. Colonel Rob Hayes, 45, a seasoned Army strategist, monitored satellite feeds from the command center. His face was tense, eyes scanning screens that displayed every street, every alley, every potential threat. Orders came fast and furious over the radio. Each command carried weight, each decision a gamble with lives on the line. Meanwhile, Abu Omar, 35, the insurgent leader, had spent months preparing for this moment. Snipers perched on rooftops, eyes scanning the streets for movement. Improvised explosives were hidden behind piles of rubble, in doorways, under vehicles. He orchestrated his forces like a conductor, every movement calculated, every trap set to slow and kill the advancing Marines. This was no conventional battle. It was a brutal chess match, fought block by block, alley by alley, in the heart of an ancient city. The streets of Fallujah twisted like a labyrinth. Civilians scrambled to survive, hiding wherever they could. Ahmed and his daughter moved through narrow alleys, ducking behind shattered walls and burnt-out cars. Neighbors ran past him, some carrying children, others dragging the wounded. The fear was omnipresent. Every breath carried the possibility of death. Sami Hassan, 25, a young medic, sprinted toward the city hospital, weaving between falling debris and incoming fire. His mission was clear: treat the wounded as quickly as possible. The first wave of casualties arrived, bleeding, screaming, and terrified. Sami moved swiftly, pulling people to safety, applying bandages, administering morphine, and shouting orders to fellow medics. The hospital had become a front line, the corridors echoing with human suffering. Explosions shattered walls, sending clouds of dust and debris into the air. For the Marines, every house could hide insurgents or a bomb. For insurgents, every street corner was an opportunity to strike, to slow the American advance. For civilians, survival was uncertain. Each moment was a choice between hiding, running, or praying. By midday, the first major firefight erupted in Fallujah's city center. Gunfire tore through walls, glass shattered, and the thick smoke hung in the air, turning daylight into a suffocating gray haze. John Miller's platoon moved forward cautiously, their mission terrifyingly simple: advance, clear, survive. But the lines between enemy and ally, civilian and combatant, blurred in the chaos. The city had become a trap, alive with danger at every turn. Snipers fired from hidden perches, RPGs detonated on the streets, and improvised bombs exploded without warning. John and his squad pressed forward, advancing house by house, alley by alley, clearing every street and trying to secure every intersection. Civilians were caught in the middle, some huddled in basements, others trapped behind barricades or under collapsing structures. As the day wore on, the fighting intensified. Smoke from burning vehicles filled the air, mingling with dust and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Shouts of Marines calling coordinates and commands echoed alongside cries of frightened civilians and the distant, sinister laughter of insurgents hiding in the ruins. Each minute brought more chaos, more danger, and more lives at stake. By evening, Fallujah was no longer a city, it was a battlefield. Streets were scarred, buildings gutted, and every block a potential death trap. John Miller's platoon regrouped, checking their injured, scanning for threats, and planning the next move. Sami Hassan continued his rounds, treating the wounded wherever he could find them, his hands shaking from exhaustion but steady in purpose. Ahmed clutched his daughter tightly, both of them surviving by a fraction of luck and instinct. As night fell, a haunting realization settled over the city. Abu Omar's plan was unfolding exactly as intended. The streets teemed with hidden insurgents, every corner a potential ambush. The horrors of the coming nights were unimaginable, and Fallujah had become a crucible of fire, fear, and human endurance. The siege of Fallujah had begun in earnest. And no one, soldier or civilian, would emerge untouched. November 9, 2004. Fallujah streets were ablaze, smoke and gunfire turning dawn into a hellish battlefield. The city that had once bustled with life now groaned under the weight of war. Rubble filled every alley, and the stench of smoke and burning buildings hung thick in the air. The faint cries of frightened civilians mixed with the constant rattle of gunfire and distant explosions. This was no longer a city, it was a war zone. John Miller's platoon moved cautiously through the shattered streets. Each step carried risk. Hidden explosives threatened to detonate underfoot, and insurgents fired from ruined buildings, using the city's ruins to their advantage. John, 32, a veteran of multiple deployments, signaled his men silently, eyes scanning every doorway, every broken window. His radio crackled constantly with updates, warnings, and shouts. Every sound was a threat, every shadow could hide death. Across the city, Ahmed al-Assad, 28, crouched in the basement of his partially destroyed home. His daughter, no more than 6, clung to him tightly, eyes wide with fear. Explosions shook the walls above them, dust and debris falling like rain. Outside, neighbors argued over escape routes, shouting over the din of gunfire. Ahmed's heart pounded with every blast. He knew that leaving the basement meant risking their lives, yet staying put could be equally deadly. Each decision was a gamble in a city where survival seemed impossible. Lieutenant Mark Simmons, 29, led a small squad down a main avenue. The streets were littered with the remnants of destroyed vehicles, burned-out buildings, and the occasional corpse. Sniper fire pinned them against a crumbling wall. One of his men went down, and Simmons shouted over the gunfire, directing the others to suppress insurgent positions. Marines returned fire, advancing only a few feet at a time. Adrenaline surged through them, mixing with terror and the grim determination to survive. Each building they cleared revealed new dangers, traps, hidden shooters, and explosive devices. Meanwhile, Sami Hassan, 25, a young medic, ran through the hospital corridors, which overflowed with the wounded. Shrapnel wounds, burns, broken limbs, and panic filled every corner. He moved from room to room, treating civilians and soldiers alike, applying bandages, administering pain relief, and organizing evacuation routes. Each second mattered. One misstep, one delay, could mean the difference between life and death. The hospital had become a front line, a sanctuary under siege, yet every hall was fraught with danger. From a hidden command center, Abu Omar, 35, insurgent leader, orchestrated his forces with chilling precision. Using cell phones, lookouts, and a network of communication among fighters, he directed attacks where Marines were most vulnerable. Improvised bombs were planted along supply routes. Ambush points were set at street intersections. Each U.S. move was anticipated, and each reaction carefully countered. For him, the city itself was a weapon, every street a calculated advantage. Colonel Rob Hayes, 45, watched from the command post. Tactical maps, satellite images, and casualty reports filled the screens before him. He barked orders over the radio, coordinating reinforcements and movements across the city. The decisions were fast, precise, and punishing. Reports of trapped civilians added weight to every command. The human cost of every tactical decision was immense, but the mission had to continue. By midday, the battle escalated into an intense firefight in a small market square. Rockets tore into nearby buildings, sending plumes of smoke into the air. Civilians screamed and dove for cover wherever they could. Ahmed whispered prayers, gripping his daughter's hand as they crouched beneath a shattered wall. The firefight was brutal. Every second tested endurance, skill, and morality. Marines advanced cautiously, clearing pockets of resistance, while insurgents struck from every angle, forcing constant vigilance. As night approached, Fallujah's skyline glowed red. Fires raged unchecked, sending thick plumes of smoke into the darkening sky. Streets were littered with debris, broken vehicles, and bodies. The city had become unrecognizable. Civilians were trapped between two relentless forces, their survival uncertain. Marines and insurgents fought in an environment where every building was a battlefield, every shadow a potential killer. Then came the critical report. Insurgents had fortified a key neighborhood, cutting off the Marines' advance. John Miller's platoon faced the terrifying prospect of being trapped in a deadly crossfire. The city's maze-like streets offered no easy escape. Every plan had to be reconsidered. Every step forward could lead to disaster. Fallujah was no longer just a city. It was a living, breathing battleground, filled with smoke, fire, and human suffering. And in the shadows, Abu Omar's plan was taking shape, promising horrors that no one, soldier or civilian, could yet imagine. November 10, 2004. John Miller realized too late that the city was closing in on them, every street a potential death trap. The morning air was thick with smoke, and the scent of burning rubble lingered like a warning. Fallujah had become an inferno. Every block was a threat, every alley a possible ambush. The city seemed alive, shifting and changing with every step the Marines took. John Miller, 32, led his platoon cautiously into the neighborhood intelligence had flagged as heavily fortified. His eyes scanned windows, rooftops, and collapsed buildings. Every corner could hide a sniper, every door could conceal an improvised bomb. The tension in the air was palpable. His team moved with precision, signaling silently, checking each street as they advanced. The roar of distant artillery and the crackle of small arms fire reminded them that Fallujah was no ordinary battlefield. Across town, Ahmed al-Saad, 28, tried to guide his family through alleys littered with debris. His neighbors were gone. Some had hidden in basements, others had fled entirely. Every explosion sent shivers through him. Every shout from the Marines above reminded him that no place in the city was safe. Ahmed gripped his daughter tightly. Her small hand in his was a lifeline. Each step forward was a gamble. Every turn could be fatal, yet stopping was not an option. Survival required stealth, courage, and hope. Lieutenant Mark Simmons, 29, directed his squad as gunfire erupted from 3 directions simultaneously. The streets had become a maze of chaos. One Marine fell to a sniper's bullet, and the others dragged him behind a shattered wall. Sparks from ricocheting rounds illuminated the smoke-filled air. Simmons shouted commands, coordinating suppressive fire while advancing just a few feet at a time. Improvised bombs detonated beneath vehicles, sending shards of metal and concrete flying. The streets offered no safe zones. Every building was a potential battlefield. Every shadow was a threat. Meanwhile, Sami Hassan, 25, sprinted through the hospital once again. The building shook as nearby structures collapsed under rocket fire and artillery strikes. Shrapnel tore through walls, and injured civilians were brought in faster than he could treat them. Each hallway was a maze of chaos. Broken glass, rubble, smoke, and screaming filled every corner. Sami moved quickly, saving lives whenever he could, dodging falling debris, and guiding people to safer rooms. Each casualty reminded him of the brutal cost of this siege. Every second mattered. Abu Omar, 35, the insurgent commander, coordinated his fighters like a maestro. From hidden vantage points, he reinforced barricades, created false escape routes to lure Marines into ambushes, and deployed snipers to cover every avenue of approach. For him, the streets of Fallujah were a weapon. Every building, every collapsed wall, every narrow alley was a strategic advantage. He watched as chaos spread, calculating the impact of every explosion, every firefight. Colonel Rob Hayes, 45, observed the front lines with growing concern from the command post. Communications were erratic, radios crackled with fragments of reports, and updates of trapped Marines and civilian casualties flooded in. The original plan to advance through the city was collapsing under pressure. Every decision carried immense risk. Reinforcements were en route, but the city's twisted streets and fortified insurgent positions made coordination almost impossible. By late afternoon, John's platoon found themselves cornered in a narrow street. Bullets tore through crumbling walls, dust and debris filling the air with every explosion. Marines returned fire, but insurgents seemed omnipresent. They had anticipated every move. Every turn forward could be their last. The squad hunkered behind ruined vehicles, eyes scanning, fingers tightening on triggers, hearts racing with the tension of being completely outnumbered. Ahmed and his daughter crouched in a ruined home, listening to the relentless gunfire outside. Every heartbeat was a reminder that survival in Fallujah was never guaranteed. Luck, timing, and endurance were the only weapons civilians had. For Ahmed, there was no hero, no rescue. Just the instinct to survive. As night fell, the situation grew bleaker. Reports came in over radios. Insurgents had cut off the main escape route. John's platoon was trapped, surrounded by enemy fire. Reinforcements would arrive, but before dawn, insurgents were already planning a counterattack. Every Marine knew the coming hours would test their skill, their courage, and their will to survive. Fallujah had tightened its grip. There was no turning back. The city was alive with fire, gunfire, and death. And in the darkness, the insurgent strategy was unfolding perfectly, threatening to turn the trapped Marines into targets and the streets into a tomb. The siege of Fallujah was escalating, and no one inside its walls would emerge unscathed. November 11, 2004. Before sunrise, Fallujah roared with gunfire. The city was about to strike back at the Marines with a ferocity they had not fully anticipated. Smoke from the previous day's destruction still lingered in the streets, turning the pale morning light into a gray, ominous haze. Every corner, every alley, every street had become a potential death trap. The first light barely pierced the thick clouds of dust and smoke as John Miller, 32, scanned the horizon from behind a mound of rubble. His platoon had advanced cautiously the night before, but the insurgents had prepared for a counterattack. Every street had been funneled into choke points, buildings fortified and rigged with explosives. Snipers waited in hidden positions, their scopes trained on advancing Marines. The smell of burning wood and rubble mixed with the acrid scent of gunpowder, filling the air with tension. John's eyes darted from building to building, anticipating every threat, knowing that hesitation could mean death. Ahmed al-Saad, 28, clutched his 6-year-old daughter tightly in a basement shelter. Explosions rattled the walls and sent vibrations through the ground. Outside, shouts and gunfire pierced the fragile morning. Ahmed's neighborhood, once alive with children's laughter and street vendors, had transformed into a war zone. He whispered silent prayers, urging his daughter to stay low, to remain invisible. Every step she took outside would be a gamble against snipers, ambushes, and collapsing buildings. Lieutenant Mark Simmons, 29, led a small squad through twisted alleys, coordinating suppressive fire. The insurgents were ruthless, firing from hidden windows, rooftops, and corners. Molotov cocktails ignited trash and debris, sending flames into the streets, while roadside bombs detonated without warning. Each step forward was met with deadly precision, forcing the Marines to advance slowly, methodically. Simmons barked orders over his radio, repositioning squads and coordinating movements to minimize casualties. Despite his experience, he knew this was one of the most dangerous urban engagements any of his men had faced. Sami Hassan, 25, rushed through the hospital corridors. The building had become a front line, with wounded civilians and Marines flooding in from every direction. Shrapnel tore through walls, and screams filled the halls. Sami stitched wounds, administered morphine, and organized evacuation routes for civilians. Each injured person was a race against time, every second a challenge to his endurance and skill. The hospital's capacity was stretched beyond its limits, and the casualties were mounting faster than he could treat them. Abu Omar, 35, observed the battle from a concealed vantage point. His insurgents executed ambushes with deadly precision, cutting off supply routes and creating chaos at every turn. Explosions shattered walls, and every street the Marines advanced through seemed to become a trap. For Abu Omar, this counterattack was not just tactical, it was a message: Fallujah would not be surrendered, not willingly, not without blood. Colonel Rob Hayes, 45, monitored the battlefield from the command post. Tactical maps, satellite feeds, and radio reports painted a grim picture. Reinforcements were on the way, but delays and miscommunication complicated every decision. The Marines were holding ground, but every moment in Fallujah carried escalating risk. Civilian casualties, blocked routes, and relentless enemy fire created a nightmare scenario. By midday, firefights erupted across multiple streets. Tanks and armored vehicles moved cautiously, firing into fortified positions, while sniper fire and IEDs targeted every movement. Ahmed and other civilians struggled to survive in homes riddled with bullets. Smoke and dust choked the streets, and the city had become a labyrinth of fire and terror. John's platoon reached a narrow intersection, only to find insurgents entrenched with machine guns and homemade explosives. Gunfire erupted from all sides. Buildings shuddered and crumbled as the firefight escalated. Every decision demanded courage, strategy, and the raw will to survive. Marines advanced house by house, clearing rooms, while insurgents adapted, retreating and re-emerging to strike from new angles. As dusk approached, a chilling message arrived. Another insurgent stronghold had been fortified overnight. The platoon's only escape route had become a killing zone. Every option forward or backward carried the threat of death. John Miller surveyed his team, their faces grim and determined. The dawn counterattack had changed everything. Fallujah had seized the initiative, and the Marines were now trapped in a city that refused to surrender. November 12, 2004. Fallujah had become a city of fire, rubble, and fear, every street a battleground. The echoes of gunfire bounced off ruined buildings, blending with the wails of civilians trapped inside their homes. Smoke and dust filled the air, turning sunlight into a gray, suffocating haze. Every step through the streets was a test of courage and survival. John Miller, 32, led his platoon cautiously through the shattered avenues. Every block carried potential death. Improvised explosives lurked beneath rubble, every doorway could conceal a sniper, and each crumbling wall offered perfect cover for insurgents. His team moved in tight formation, scanning for threats, signaling silently, and advancing only when absolutely certain the path ahead was safe. Each second in the streets was a gamble. The city had become a predator, hunting anyone who dared cross it. Ahmed al-Saad, 28, held his 6-year-old daughter's hand tightly, weaving through debris-strewn alleys. Every explosion made their hearts leap into their throats. Buildings shook violently, dust raining down on them. Neighbors were gone, either hidden in basements or fleeing through streets too dangerous to navigate. Civilians huddled wherever they could, praying silently as firefights tore the city apart. Fallujah had become a maze of death, and Ahmed's every decision, every step, was a fight to survive. Lieutenant Mark Simmons, 29, guided his squad into a derelict marketplace. The square had been reduced to ruins, burned-out vehicles, shattered walls, and rubble everywhere. Insurgents fired from hidden corners, windows, and rooftop positions. Smoke from burning vehicles choked the air, stinging eyes and making visibility nearly impossible. Simmons barked commands, coordinating suppressive fire while his men advanced slowly. Every move was calculated, yet every street, every alley seemed rigged with danger. The insurgents exploited every advantage, turning the city into a labyrinth of ambush points. Meanwhile, Sami Hassan, 25, worked tirelessly in the hospital. Injured civilians arrived in waves, some carrying shrapnel wounds, others in shock from witnessing family members killed. The medical staff was overwhelmed. Sammy moved from room to room, applying bandages, administering morphine, and directing volunteers to transport the wounded. Each life saved was a minor victory, but the scale of suffering was staggering. Every scream reminded him of the human cost of the siege, and the pressure never let up. Abu Omar, 35, orchestrated his fighters with cold precision. Barricades were reinforced, ambush points set along every supply route, and civilians were used as shields to slow Marine advances. For him, the strategy wasn't just defense, it was making Fallujah itself a trap, every block, every building, every street an obstacle designed to kill or trap enemy forces. He moved among his fighters, observing, signaling, and executing plans that turned the urban environment into a weapon. Colonel Rob Hayes, 45, monitored the front lines from the command post. Tactical maps and satellite feeds painted a grim picture. Tanks and armored vehicles pushed through the city, providing support to Marines on the ground, but insurgents adapted quickly. Rooftop snipers, hidden explosives, and narrow streets turned every advance into a fight for survival. Communication delays made coordination nearly impossible, and civilian casualties added a weight to every command. By late afternoon, a critical intersection became the focal point of brutal combat. Marines were pinned down under constant fire while trying to rescue civilians trapped nearby. Ahmed and his daughter huddled in a collapsed building, choking on dust, smoke, and fear. The city had become a living nightmare, a maze where every movement carried lethal risk. John Miller radioed for air support, but insurgents had anticipated their movements. Helicopters faced RPGs and anti-aircraft fire, making aerial assistance perilous. Every tactical decision carried immense risk, and the Marines knew that a single misstep could be fatal. As night fell, reports arrived over the radio. Insurgents had captured part of the city's main supply route. John's platoon was isolated, trapped, and facing an ambush that could claim dozens of lives. The streets of Fallujah were no longer just battlegrounds, they were death traps, alive with fire, smoke, and human desperation. The city's grip tightened with every passing hour, and survival became a test of skill, courage, and sheer will. November 13, 2004. Fallujah burned from every corner, smoke and fire turning the city into a shadow of its former self. The once bustling streets were now a labyrinth of rubble, ash, and twisted metal. Every building, every alley, every corner had become a potential death trap. The roar of gunfire echoed through shattered walls, mixing with the distant thuds of explosions. The city had become an unforgiving battlefield, alive with danger and uncertainty. John Miller, 32, led his platoon cautiously through the debris-strewn streets. Their boots crunched over broken glass, bricks, and scorched asphalt. Smoke hung low, obscuring vision and masking threats, allowing insurgents to strike from hidden positions. Every step was a calculated risk. Each alleyway could conceal snipers. Every ruined building might harbor improvised explosives. The city itself seemed hostile, moving against them with every turn. Ahmed al-Saad, 28, clutched his daughter tightly as they navigated through shattered streets. Families moved quietly between destroyed buildings, their eyes alert to any movement. A single misstep could be fatal. The fear was omnipresent, palpable in every whispered word and every hurried step. Children huddled close to parents, praying silently, while neighbors guided each other through collapsed alleyways. The normal rhythm of life had been replaced by a desperate dance for survival. Lieutenant Mark Simmons, 29, led a small squad into a ruined residential block to clear insurgent positions. The streets were littered with debris, twisted metal, and the remains of homes once filled with life. Traps were everywhere, hidden explosives, sniper nests, and barricades designed to slow the Marines' advance. The firefight was relentless. Bullets tore through walls, sending splinters flying. Smoke and dust choked the air, limiting visibility. Every move required nerve, precision, and split-second decisions. Each house cleared revealed another threat. Each alley was a potential ambush. Survival depended on focus and discipline, and even then, luck played a role. Sami Hassan, 25, moved through the overwhelmed hospital once more. Mortar rounds and small arms fire shook the building, rattling walls and ceilings. Injured civilians and soldiers arrived in waves. Some carried shrapnel wounds, others were traumatized by what they had witnessed. Sammy worked tirelessly, stitching wounds, administering pain relief, and organizing volunteers to transport the injured to safer rooms. Each scream, each plea for help, tested his endurance. Every life saved was a small victory amid the overwhelming chaos. Abu Omar, 35, coordinated his fighters with ruthless precision. Barricades were reinforced, explosives laid, and ambush points established at every strategic location. For him, the city itself was a weapon. Every street became a line of fire. Every collapsed building a shield. Every civilian a potential distraction for the Marines. He studied the battlefield from hidden vantage points, orchestrating attacks with a level of cold calculation that turned Fallujah into a near-impenetrable fortress. Colonel Rob Hayes, 45, oversaw operations from the command post, coordinating armored movements and airstrikes. Tanks fired into fortified positions while infantry pressed forward, trying to dislodge insurgents. Yet every advance came at a cost. Civilians were trapped in the crossfire, buildings collapsed, and insurgents adapted quickly, using rubble, streets, and even frightened residents to their advantage. Every decision weighed heavily on Hayes. Every strike risked more human lives, but holding ground was essential to the mission. By afternoon, John's platoon reached the city's main intersection, the heart of insurgent defenses. Smoke obscured vision. Bullets tore through walls and shattered glass. Marines moved block by block, clearing houses, rescuing trapped civilians whenever possible, all while under constant fire. Ahmed and other families huddled in basements, listening to the chaos above, hearts racing with each explosion and gunshot. The city was no longer safe. Survival depended on chance, timing, and sheer will. As night fell, John Miller received urgent orders over the radio. Abu Omar had launched a coordinated counterattack across multiple neighborhoods. The threat of encirclement loomed. Every route of escape, every approach, was now a potential trap. The city had tightened its grip. Fallujah's maze of fire, rubble, and shadows threatened to swallow the platoon whole. The siege was escalating, and the night promised horrors yet unseen. November 14, 2004. John Miller's platoon was trapped. Fallujah had closed in like a predator, every street a cage of fire. Smoke hung thick over shattered buildings, and the acrid stench of burning vehicles filled the air. Gunfire echoed constantly, ricocheting off walls, turning every alley into a potential death trap. The city had become a labyrinth, alive with danger and unpredictability. John Miller, 32, scanned the streets ahead and behind. Insurgents had blocked key routes, reinforced rooftop positions, and planted explosives along every approach. Every move was measured, every glance over his shoulder a reminder that a misstep could mean death. The city's familiar streets had been transformed into a hostile maze, where even the bravest Marines felt the pressure of constant threat. Ahmed al-Saad, 28, led his daughter through the chaos, ducking into the remains of a bombed-out building. Dust and smoke choked the air, and the cries of trapped civilians echoed from the streets. Each step was calculated. Visibility was poor, and the danger of snipers or sudden explosions was everywhere. Survival depended entirely on staying unseen. The city had become an enemy in itself, every corner hiding possible death. Ahmed whispered reassurances to his daughter, though fear lingered in every word. Lieutenant Mark Simmons, 29, coordinated small teams to provide cover fire and evacuate civilians trapped in exposed areas. Bullets shredded walls around them, smoke filled their lungs, and every building threatened collapse. The Marines advanced only a few meters at a time, under relentless insurgent pressure. Each corner they cleared revealed more threats, hidden snipers, booby traps, and barricaded positions. Every decision was a gamble, but stopping meant allowing civilians and fellow soldiers to die. Simmons pushed forward, forcing his team to adapt quickly to the ever-changing battlefield. Sami Hassan, 25, moved tirelessly between hospitals and makeshift clinics. The number of casualties surged as insurgents intensified attacks on both military and civilian areas. Injuries ranged from shrapnel wounds to burns and broken limbs. Supplies were running dangerously low. Every patient saved was a small victory, yet every delay increased the risk of death. He coordinated volunteers, rationed medicines, and triaged injuries as best he could, all while explosions shook the fragile structures he moved through. Abu Omar, 35, orchestrated his insurgents with terrifying efficiency. His knowledge of Fallujah gave him the upper hand. He reinforced barricades, controlled vantage points, and set up ambushes in every street. Tunnels and hidden passages allowed fighters to strike quickly and vanish. Civilians were used as shields, slowing Marine movements and amplifying the chaos. For Abu Omar, the city itself had become a weapon, each block designed to trap and destroy the invading forces. Colonel Rob Hayes, 45, monitored the situation from the command post. Tanks and armored vehicles attempted to push through narrow streets, supporting infantry under heavy fire. Artillery strikes and air support were coordinated, but insurgents adapted swiftly. RPGs, machine guns, and IEDs made close operations deadly. Communication delays compounded the challenge. Each tactical decision carried the weight of potential civilian casualties and Marine losses. By mid-afternoon, John's platoon was partially surrounded. Retreat paths had been cut off. Marines fought street by street, block by block, facing intense gunfire from every direction. The air was filled with the smell of smoke, gunpowder, and death. Casualties mounted, but determination drove the platoon forward. Each decision was a balance of survival, duty, and moral responsibility. Ahmed and other civilians huddled in fear, trapped between the relentless battle lines. Their homes were ruins, streets were traps, and the city itself had become an inferno. Escape seemed impossible. Then came the terrifying news over the radio. Insurgents had captured a strategic intersection controlling access to the city's hospital. The route was blocked. Marines and wounded civilians alike were now in jeopardy. The noose was tightening. Fallujah streets had become a cage, and the battle was far from over. Every second could be the difference between life and death. November 15, 2004. Fallujah's main hospital had become a fortress, and a nightmare for anyone inside. Smoke curled from shattered windows, and the air was thick with dust, gunpowder, and fear. Bullets tore through walls, and explosions rattled nearby buildings. The once vital center of healing had been transformed into a battlefield. Every corridor, every room, every stairwell held a hidden threat. The city outside was chaos, but inside, survival hung by a thread. John Miller, 32, led his platoon toward the hospital under relentless fire. Insurgents had fortified the building, turning it into a deadly stronghold. Tanks provided cover, but even armored vehicles were vulnerable to the well-placed RPGs and sniper fire. Every step closer to the building was met with lethal resistance. The streets leading up to the hospital were littered with rubble, abandoned vehicles, and debris that slowed the Marines' advance, forcing them into narrow kill zones where insurgents waited with precision. Inside the hospital, Ahmed al-Saad, 28, held his 6-year-old daughter tightly. They huddled in a basement room with other civilians, listening to screams, gunfire, and the constant thud of explosions. Smoke filled the air, choking them, burning eyes, and making each breath a struggle. Fear was omnipresent, but amidst it, whispered prayers persisted. Ahmed clung to hope, knowing that even in the heart of terror, survival was possible if he stayed quiet, stayed low, and trusted that the Marines would arrive. Lieutenant Mark Simmons, 29, led a squad through a side entrance into the hospital. The corridors were narrow, dimly lit by flickering lights, and filled with the stench of smoke and blood. Every hallway hid traps, snipers, and improvised explosives. Marines moved cautiously, clearing rooms systematically. The tension was suffocating. A single wrong step could trigger an explosion, and insurgents struck with deadly precision. Training was tested to its limits, as every move demanded awareness, courage, and split-second judgment. Sami Hassan, 25, darted among the wounded. He treated soldiers and civilians alike, often simultaneously. The building shook as nearby structures collapsed, sending dust and debris into hallways. Supplies were limited, but he moved quickly, stitching wounds, administering pain relief, and organizing evacuation routes for civilians. Each life saved was a minor victory in a building where danger was constant and chaos ruled. Every scream reminded him of the human cost. Every second counted. Abu Omar, 35, oversaw the hospital's defense from the upper floors. He reinforced barricades, positioned snipers with clear lines of sight, and set explosives to deter any direct assault. For him, the hospital was more than a building. It was a symbol. Fallujah would remain under insurgent control if the Marines could not take it. He watched as his fighters struck with lethal efficiency, exploiting the maze-like interior and creating ambush points wherever possible. Colonel Rob Hayes, 45, coordinated air and artillery support from the command post. Tanks moved into position, and strikes shattered sections of the hospital's exterior. Every calculation was critical. Too little support and Marines would be overwhelmed. Too much fire, and civilians trapped inside could perish. The tension was unbearable, and each decision carried the weight of dozens of lives. By evening, John's platoon breached the hospital's perimeter. Close quarters combat erupted in corridors and rooms. Smoke thickened, shouts echoed, and bullets tore through walls. Marines cleared hallways systematically, rescuing civilians while engaging insurgents in brutal, hand-to-hand fights when necessary. Ahmed and his daughter watched in awe, realizing that survival required both luck and human bravery. Sami Hassan continued tirelessly, moving through chaos, saving life after life, stitching together hope in the middle of destruction. As night fell, reports arrived over the radio. Insurgents had set up a final, deadly ambush in the hospital's main wing. John's platoon was facing a fight that could determine the fate of everyone inside. The building, once a sanctuary, had become a crucible of courage, terror, and survival, and the night ahead promised a battle that would test every Marine, every medic, and every civilian caught in Fallujah's relentless grip. November 16, 2004. Fallujah streets burned brighter than ever, and John Miller knew the final battle had begun. Smoke rose from every corner, mingling with the stench of rubble, dust, and burning debris. The city was unrecognizable, once vibrant neighborhoods now lay in ruins. Every building, every alley, every intersection was rigged with traps. The roar of artillery and the sharp crack of gunfire set a relentless tempo. This was the day the Marines would push to reclaim the city, or pay the ultimate price. John Miller, 32, tightened his grip on his rifle and signaled his platoon. Their faces were tense, eyes scanning for threats amid the chaos. Insurgents were entrenched, determined to resist at all costs. Every step forward required careful calculation. Each corner could hide a sniper. Every building could collapse under the impact of a rocket or bomb. The final push would test every Marine's courage, endurance, and skill. Ahmed Al-Saad, 28, emerged cautiously from the rubble of his neighborhood with his daughter. Their home was destroyed, reduced to twisted metal and shattered concrete. Streets were lined with debris, the air thick with smoke and the sound of distant explosions. Civilians moved silently, carrying the wounded or fleeing to safer zones. Each step they took was a gamble. Every move could trigger a hidden IED or draw sniper fire. Survival was their only goal. Lieutenant Mark Simmons, 29, coordinated squads to clear barricaded intersections and fortified positions. Marines moved in tight formations, checking corners, doors, and windows for threats. Snipers held rooftop vantage points, and improvised explosives lurked in rubble piles. Each block required precision, patience, and nerves of steel. Marines advanced slowly, pushing insurgents back while trying to minimize civilian casualties. Smoke and dust turned daylight into a gray haze, and every sound, every shout or explosion, demanded instant response. Sami Hassan, 25, dashed between triage points in the hospital, which had become both a battlefield and a sanctuary. Medical supplies were low, casualties continued to rise, and each decision could determine who lived and who died. He patched wounds, calmed terrified civilians, and coordinated evacuation routes. Every second mattered. Each rescue carried the weight of life or death. Sammy's endurance was tested as he moved among the chaos, stitching hope into the city's shattered body. Abu Omar, 35, prepared a desperate last stand. His fighters held rooftops, planted explosives in streets, and used civilians as shields to slow the Marines' advance. Each sniper nest was positioned to inflict maximum damage. Each barricade was calculated to force the Marines into kill zones. For Abu Omar, the battle was not just military, it was psychological, designed to break the resolve of every soldier who dared advance. Colonel Rob Hayes, 45, coordinated artillery, airstrikes, and armored reinforcements. Tanks moved cautiously through rubble-strewn streets, covering infantry as they advanced. Helicopters strafed enemy positions, providing cover fire while minimizing risk to civilians below. The operation required meticulous planning, combining precision, firepower, and brute force. Every strike was calculated, but the chaos of urban warfare made certainty impossible. By midday, John's platoon breached the hospital's main wing. Close-quarters combat erupted, gunfire shredded walls, smoke filled corridors, and screams echoed through the building. Marines cleared rooms systematically, neutralizing snipers, and dismantling barricades. Civilians, including Ahmed and his daughter, were escorted to safer areas, each movement tense and nerve-wracking. The firefight was relentless, with every step forward exacting a toll in sweat, courage, and risk. As the afternoon wore on, insurgent resistance began to crumble. Key intersections were reclaimed. Barricades were dismantled. Snipers were eliminated. Yet the human cost was staggering. The streets were littered with rubble, debris, and the echoes of lives lost. Smoke and fire marked the city's skeleton. The victory, though within reach, had come at an enormous price. Even as the Marines celebrated their hard-fought progress, John received a chilling report over the radio. Insurgents had regrouped in a nearby district. They were preparing one final ambush, a trap that could undo everything the platoon had fought for. Every victory gained in Fallujah was now precarious, and the shadows of the city still held lethal surprises. The battle was not yet over, and the night promised more danger, more chaos, and more tests of courage than any Marine had faced in weeks. November 17, 2004. After 9 days of relentless fighting, Fallujah finally fell, but the cost was unimaginable. Smoke still drifted from shattered buildings, and the streets were lined with rubble, twisted metal, and the remnants of a city that had endured relentless combat. The echoes of gunfire had mostly faded, replaced by the murmurs of civilians emerging from hiding and the cautious movements of Marines securing every block. John Miller, 32, led his platoon through the devastated streets, clearing the final pockets of insurgent resistance. Every building told a story, walls pockmarked with bullet holes, furniture destroyed, personal belongings scattered among the rubble. Each cleared room was a testament to both survival and loss. The platoon moved methodically, aware that even after the battle, danger lingered. Mines, hidden explosives, and snipers remained threats, but the city was slowly yielding. Ahmed al-Saad, 28, stepped out of a collapsed building with his daughter, surveying the ruins of his neighborhood. What had once been a familiar maze of streets and homes was now unrecognizable. The debris of war was everywhere, yet amid the destruction, civilians began helping each other, moving carefully through the wreckage, salvaging what little remained, and tending to the wounded. The human spirit, battered but unbroken, began to re-emerge. Lieutenant Mark Simmons, 29, directed his squad to assist in evacuating trapped civilians. Families were guided to safer areas while Marines cleared debris and secured streets. Meanwhile, Sami Hassan, 25, worked tirelessly in the hospital, which had transitioned from a battlefield to a center of recovery. He treated the wounded, coordinated supplies, and offered comfort to civilians traumatized by the violence. Soldiers and medics worked side by side, bridging the gap between war and humanity, showing that even in destruction, care and courage persisted. Abu Omar's insurgent forces had either surrendered, fled, or been neutralized. Fallujah's resistance had ended, but the scars of battle were everywhere. The lessons of the siege were stark. Urban warfare leaves no true winners. There were survivors, but at an immense cost. Families had lost homes, lives had been shattered, and the city itself bore deep wounds that would take years to heal. Colonel Rob Hayes, 45, surveyed the battlefield from a vantage point. The operation was a tactical success, yet he knew the victory came with a heavy toll. Civilians had suffered immensely, and the reconstruction ahead would be long and arduous. The siege of Fallujah was a reminder of the bravery of soldiers, the resilience of ordinary people, and the harsh realities of urban combat. By evening, U.S. forces had secured key districts, and humanitarian aid began reaching survivors. Ahmed and his daughter, along with countless others, faced the daunting task of rebuilding their lives, holding on to memory and resilience as their only shields against despair. The city's ruins stood as both a warning and a testament, proof of humanity's strength and fragility in the face of war. Fallujah's story is not just about soldiers and battles, it is about the human cost of conflict. Remember the lives lost, the courage shown, and the families forever changed. Share this story. Educate yourself and others. Never let the lessons of Fallujah fade. History demands our attention, and understanding it is the first step toward preventing future tragedies.